My name is Liora Hale, and the morning my father was laid into the ground, the light looked like old vellum, thin, almost translucent, with the sun holding itself back as if it didn't want to intrude. I left my apartment in my wool coat, the cuffs still dusted with library chalk from the archival boxes I'd sorted the night before. Routine is a gentle religion when you work among paper and silence. You learn how to cover grief with tasks. But grief has its own timetable. It refuses to wait until closing hours. The chapel on Pine and Willow was already full when I arrived. Cedar polish and beeswax candles softened the edges of the wooden pews, floral sprays floated their tempered perfume through recycled air. I chose a seat near the middle, hands folded around a folded funeral program. Across the aisle my stepbrother, Carter, caught my eye. He touched the knot of his black tie as though it were a private joke and gave me a quick, slanted smile. Not condolence, smugness. It landed somewhere beneath my ribs like an elbow in a crowded train. I'd seen the smile before, in smaller arenas, at my father's birthday last year, when Carter carried the toast like a publicist, and at Sunday lunches where he remembered half-truths louder than the rest of us remembered facts. Still, he had been a good enough son in the daylight, driving Dad to cardiology checkups, bringing espresso and fruit, managing paperwork at the office. Good enough to convince a dying man that his presence meant devotion. The service started. The minister's voice rose and fell like wind through a reed bed. I watched dust particles drift in thin sunbeams that cut through stained glass and faintly touched the silver in Dad's hair. Vivian, my stepmother, barely nodded at me as she dabbed her eyes with the hem of a linen handkerchief. When it was time for remembrances, Carter walked up the aisle with his smooth, assured gait and spoke into the pulpit microphone about loyalty, duty, a son's promise. He didn't need to look at his notes, his performance had the glaze of rehearsal. When he finished, he squeezed Vivian's shoulder, and there it was again, that damp little smile. What startled me wasn't his polished grief but the text that buzzed in my palm just then, a message from Mr. Marsh, my father's lawyer. After the interment, please don't leave. There's a matter we must address today. Important. He wouldn't write that without reason. Mr. Marsh always chose caution as if it were a necktie. At the graveside, wind teased the tent flaps, and dirt sounded like rain when tossed on the casket lid. I placed my hand on the cool lacquer and whispered thank yous. Thank you for the chess lessons, for the repair of my first bike chain, for the way you listened when my first book proposal was rejected and said, then we try again. As I stepped back, I felt eyes on me. Carter stood a pace away, thumb brushing his cufflink. The smirk returned, subtle as a watermark. It said, I know something you don't. Back at the chapel reception, sliced poppy seed cake sat next to ham sandwiches that no one seemed to want. Low conversations drifted in a pool of amber light from hanging lanterns. I found Mr. Marsh near an urn of coffee, his gray hair slightly disarrayed in a way it never was at the office. Liora, he said, voice low. I'm sorry to do this today, but circumstance insisted. You texted, I said, managing a smile that was more structure than feeling. You sound like a subpoena. He led me to a quiet side room with a stained glass window shaped like an almond. Vivian and Carter were already inside, the latter leaned against a bookcase, studying his nails. The room smelled faintly of old hymnals and lemon oil. What's this? Vivian asked with gentle annoyance, as if someone had switched the plates in a tasting menu. Her mascara had bled into a soft gray along her lower lash line. We should be consoling guests. I won't take long, Mr. Marsh said. He set a thin leather folio on the table. Your father asked that I share an update in the presence of both his children and his wife. He was specific about the timing. Carter's eyes flickered. For a half-second, the smirk paused. I felt a quiet current go through the room, like the chapel's refrigerator hum switching off. The lawyer opened the folio and slid a document free. The official weight of paper does something to the air, even breathing feels like a decision you have to get right. Mr. Marsh cleared his throat. 5 weeks before his passing, your father executed a codicil to his will and amended the Hale family trust. Vivian's hand tightened around the handle of her handbag. Amended, how? In ways we will outline, Mr. Marsh said. But there is an order to this. He looked at me, then at Carter. The paws stretched, delicate as sugar glass. He wished to speak to the character of those he loved. He believed actions illuminate intent in ways words cannot. Carter's smile returned, back from wherever it had gone. Then I suppose, he said, light like a rubber band, we've nothing to worry about. He said it as if he had already won a game I didn't know we were playing. The smirk pressed itself into the day like a seal into wax. I pocketed my phone and kept my face ordinary. The truth is, I was not worried yet. I was only awake. The week after the funeral, grief moved through the apartment like weather, 1 hour dense as fog, the next a thin drizzle you could almost ignore. I made tea and left it cooling on the counter, twice, because the kettle's whistle startled me with its insistence. I slept with the lamp on, waking to the soft golden bowl of light that made shadows behave. At the library I catalogued a donated box of cookbooks and found, between 2 stained pages, a grocery list from 1978 written in a tidy, looping hand. Anchovies, capers, lemon peel. Finding that list made me cry harder than the eulogies had. Death, I decided, is less like a wall and more like a drawer you keep opening by accident. My father's house, the red brick colonial on Dyer Street, was no longer ours in the casual way homes are when the person who made them laugh is gone. Vivian had already changed the front door code. She texted me the new one with a neatly worded explanation about security and ongoing deliveries. I read the message twice, then realized security meant control. My bookshelves were still in the back bedroom, my coat still on the peg by the pantry door, my mother's blue porcelain bowl still under the kitchen window filled with corks from dinners long past. But access, I was learning, is not the same as belonging. The first matter Mr. Marsh had alluded to revealed itself in a formal letter 2 days after the reception. It was written in his careful Times New Roman and delivered by courier. An inventory of assets accompanied it, my father's 62% stake in Hale and Brighton, the manufacturing firm he'd built, the Dyer Street house, a small cabin near Hammers Lake, the antique blue roadster he and I had rebuilt one summer on weekends, liquid accounts whose numbers looked clean and newly pressed. The letter promised a fuller trust reading the following week, and his sentence sat in the middle like a hinge. Pending the outcome of a fiduciary review, distribution shall be temporarily suspended. Temporarily suspended. Words that in the legal world mean for a while and held, but in the world of grief sounded like a mystery with wires. I thought of Carter, his assured movements, his soft leather briefcase, the way he'd slid naturally into managerial language over the last year, realignment, runway, capitalization. He had taken on decisions at the firm when Dad's hospital days got longer. He'd kept Vivian both informed and insulated, like heat-proof gloves, never burning her with particulars. Even I wanted to believe he was what he appeared, competent, filial, steady. The human heart loves a narrative where the responsible son steps forward. And yet the phone started ringing with small phrases that didn't fit the responsible son script. Dad's mechanic called to say that the roadster, your blue arrow, he called it, had been moved without his knowledge. The housekeeper texted me that Vivian had started packing Dad's study for easier cleaning. A mid-level manager at the factory sent an email to my work address from his personal account. Just so you know, there's been talk of a transition and consolidating ownership. Your father trusted you to know where he kept paper things. Paper things. My body, which is made of the same nervous substances as memory, went cold. I had always been the one to know where Dad's paper lived, warranty cards, my mother's old letters tied with green cord, a ledger tucked beneath the false bottom of the roll-top desk that tracked the first years of the factory's cash flow. I could stand in his study and fetch a document by sound, by the way the drawers sighed or clicked. When I asked Mr. Marsh about the review, he chose words the way a surgeon chooses a scalpel. "Your father gave me authority to request an audit if circumstances required it," he said. I did not exercise that authority lightly. "What circumstances?" He hesitated. "Irregularities. Small things, sometimes their smallness is the point. Transfers that do not match the stories accompanying them. Signatures that look more confident than a sick man's hand might allow. Nothing proved. But smoke doesn't prove fire, it is often its herald." I thought of the nights I sat with Dad while he slept, the oxygen machine's soft swash-wash filling the room, the way he'd wake and pat my hand as if checking I was real. During those months, Carter was always the last to leave, emails to catch up on, calls to return, errands the rest of us were too tired to track. He had the keys to everything. Keys become doorways, doorways become decisions. If what Mr. Marsh feared was true, then the stakes were not just numbers on crisp paper. They were the house that smelled like lemon oil and rain, the factory workers whose kids I'd watched grow from baby photos in break-room frames, the roadster whose hood we'd lifted, my father's laugh caught in the engine's first cough. They were my own name, the part of it that fit inside his. If Carter had pilfered so much as a corner of that legacy, he had stolen in a metric the law measures badly: continuity. That night I unlocked the Dyer Street door with the new code and stood in a house that felt staged. Vivian had arranged bouquets in every room, a burnished piano instrumental played from the recessed ceiling speakers. The study's door was open, and boxes stood like suitcases waiting for taxis. My mother's photo, she died when I was 12, had been moved to a lower shelf. The green cord tying her letters was gone. I did not panic. I turned to the desk and listened. The second drawer from the top left clicked a half-inch sooner than it used to, like a throat clearing before a lie. I slid it out, reached under the false bottom, and found nothing. The ledger was gone. In its place lay a new thing, a cream envelope addressed in my father's hand. He wrote my name the way he always had, leaning it slightly uphill, as if urging me on. My fingers shook as I broke the seal. Inside, 3 items. A safe deposit key with a number I didn't recognize. A smaller sealed note marked "Do not open until Marsh is present." And a printed photo, my father's last birthday, candles reflected in his eyes, Carter's arm around his shoulders. The back of the photo bore 4 words in ballpoint ink: "Trust the quiet road." I stood along while holding the key, the note, the photograph. Somewhere above me the music switched to another track, a piano melody that wanted to be both sad and soothing. On the street a delivery truck hissed to a stop, brakes releasing a tired sigh. I took a breath that tasted like lemon oil and decided the story I had been given, the one Carter was perhaps trying to write for us, was not the story I would live. The vault room at Clearwater Savings is carpeted to absorb footsteps, the way museums are, so that people mind the weight of their bodies. Mr. Marsh met me in the lobby carrying his leather folio and an umbrella, though the sky outside was clear. He walked the way careful men do, straight ahead, as if learning were the same motion as looking. We sat in a small room with a brushed steel door and a square table. A clerk brought the box marked 19D 474. The key in my palm felt like a cool coin from a country that no longer exists. When we cracked the box and lifted its lid, the first thing I saw was a tape recorder, old-fashioned, with red and black buttons, and a folded legal-size document with a blue notary seal winking from its corner. Beneath them lay a leather-bound diary, the kind you buy when you think your thoughts deserve to look better on paper. "May I?" Mr. Marsh asked, already knowing my answer, and lifted the document to read. His lips moved as his eyes passed along the text. I watched the tiny movement, the way the words made small lights behind his glasses. "It's an affidavit," he said finally, voice sober but threaded with relief. "Dated 6 weeks ago. Your father states he executed a trust amendment and placed specific assets, namely, his majority stake in Hale and Brighton and the Dyer Street residence, into a protective subtrust. He lists the conditions under which that subtrust becomes irrevocable. He swallowed. The conditions include any material act of deception, coercion, or unauthorized transfer by any trustee or beneficiary, acts that can be established by evidence furnished to the court. He glanced at me. He signed in the presence of a hospice nurse and a notary public. I exhaled. The diary's leather left a light imprint on my fingers. And the recorder. He reached for it. Your father liked proof that isn't just ink. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the small room like a bell turned low. If you're hearing this, he began, it means you're in the vault, which means I still remember where the good secrets belong. He chuckled, an old-edged sound. Liora, I made the subtrust so you won't have to learn how to be sharp while you're still soft. If Carter has been decent, this will be a belt on pants that already fit. If not, it will be a belt that keeps them from falling down at the worst moment. We listened to every word. He described dates, names, and places with the exactitude of a man who had run numbers for 40 years. He noted a check cut to a vendor that didn't exist, a property transfer that went through in a week that should have taken 6, and a whisper of bridge financing from an account that was supposed to carry only petty cash. He wasn't vicious. He was disappointed in a way only fathers can be, like finding a cracked gear in a watch he'd thought would keep perfect time. He named the hospice nurse, Lorraine. He named the notary. He named a banker who had called him privately and asked whether he'd authorized an unusual movement of funds. He had. He had then unauthorized it. The movement had paused, then resumed 2 days later with a new signature, one that sloped wrong, too confident, exactly as Mr. Marsh had observed. I've asked Marsh to be a stickler, Dad said at the end, a rustle of paper audible. The terms are clear. If anything smells like rot, cut away and keep the usable wood. The diary was my father's hand turned inward. It contained entries from the last 8 months, observations, the way pain sketched itself in the margins of a day, the names of nurses who'd stayed late, of employees who'd sent handwritten cards. Sprinkled among them were notes about Carter, knows the new plant manager's first child just started kindergarten. Good. Needs to stop talking in metaphors when numbers are what the room requires. Brought vegan muffins. Who eats those? Then, later, said not to worry about the quarterly. Smiled like a TV news anchor. And later still, Marsh is right about checks and balances. I wish I had made him partner in my marriage as well. I traced his script with my fingertip and felt the roughness where his pen had pressed too hard. He wrote like a man trying to leave footprints. At the very back, tucked into a pocket, I found a photograph I hadn't seen since I was a teenager, the blue roadster, its hood up, my father kneeling, my ponytail escaped from its elastic, both of us grease-bright and grinning. On the back he'd written, 20 years earlier, Quiet Road. Someday you'll know what I mean. We met with Lorraine that afternoon in the hospice garden. Wind chimes hung from a maple, making glassy little sounds. She remembered Dad vividly. She remembered Carter, too. He was attentive, she said. Brought espresso with 2 sugars. He kept an eye on the charts in a way that struck me as managerial. She chose the word gently. The day Mr. Hale signed the affidavit, he asked me to sit not to witness a signature, but the steadiness of his decision. That's what he called it. At home that evening, I spread everything on my dining table, affidavit, diary, recorder, photograph. The city hummed through the window screen. Someone somewhere was learning scales on a trumpet, the same phrase repeated until it settled true. I thought of Carter's smirk, so small, as if he were conserving energy for a longer race. I thought of the word transition, the way it can be both a bridge and a euphemism for pushing someone off one. Proof, I knew from the archives, is a thing that breathes. It has temperature. It has smell. It is different from hearsay the way a thumbprint is different from a rumor. The evidence on my table breathed like a sleeping animal. It did not roar. It did not pose. It simply lived. I called Mr. Marsh. "We're ready," I said. "Almost," he replied. "One more thing. Your father's voice memo will speak to the court, but numbers are the court's first language. I've engaged a forensic accounting firm to put bones beneath the skin. I imagined skeletons, exact, elegant, proof the body had been designed with structure. For the first time since the funeral, I slept with the lamp off. The dark was not a threat. It was a room we could walk through. Probate court looks nothing like the stories we tell about courtroom drama. No mahogany thunder, no dramatic lighting with dust swirling in its wake. It is fluorescent bulbs and stackable chairs, the clatter of heels on linoleum, the gentle tyranny of the docket. When our matter was called, I smoothed my skirt and followed Mr. Marsh to the table, my father's diary tucked inside my bag like a small, stubborn heart. Opposite us, Carter sat with an attorney in a navy suit who looked born to speak in summaries. Vivian sat behind them in a powder blue jacket, her lips pressed into a parenthesis. She nodded at me once, I nodded back. Grief and distance can be polite to one another. The judge listened. That is mostly what judges do. Mr. Marsh spoke cleanly, not wasting any loops of language, and presented the affidavit, the notary's seal, the corroboration from Lorraine. He let the forensic accountant testify in charts and calm sentences. This transfer, the accountant said, pointer steady, originated in an account that had previously been dormant. It was routed through a vendor that does not, in fact, exist, and reappeared in an entity controlled by Mr. Carter Hale 2 weeks later as a licensing fee for a product line that has no filed patents. He did not raise his voice. The numbers were their own volume. Carter's lawyer questioned aggressively but without cruelty. He seemed to understand that the court rewards neither temper nor theater. He framed Carter's actions as eager stewardship, gestures made in an anxious market with a father fading. Was it perfect? He asked of the accountant. No, of course no. Was it malicious? He spread his hand slightly. The gesture said maybe not. Then Mr. Marsh pressed play on the recorder. The room grew a little more still, the fluorescent lights buzzing like bees in summer grass. My father's voice entered the record, unsentimental, particular, with that stubborn hinge of humor. He described not just numbers but the flavor of them, how they tasted of haste, how they used perfect grammar to say something untrue. When he said, "If Carter has been decent, this will be a belt, if not, let it be a border," I heard a quick intake of breath from Vivian. It was a small sound, human, unadorned. The judge asked questions that sounded like knitting, one loop, then another, drawing loose threads into something that could hold. He asked about timelines. He asked why the subtrust had been formed when it was. Mr. Marsh answered with an honesty that didn't paint anyone heroic. Dad had grown ill. Things had moved faster than people. We were doing what he asked. When it was Carter's turn to speak, he did something I didn't expect. He didn't smirk. He looked directly at the judge, then at me, and said, "I made decisions I wouldn't make again. I thought I was protecting value. I didn't tell my father because I didn't want to burden him." He paused. "And because I wanted to be the one who solved it. Pride is not always a villain. Sometimes it wears your shoes." The judge leaned back. He took off his glasses and polished them with a soft cloth. "Here is what the evidence shows," he said, and authority softened into plain speech. Mr. Hale anticipated the possibility of poor judgment among those closest to him. He placed guardrails. "Mr. Carter Hale, your actions triggered them. You will step aside as trustee. The subtrust is affirmed and becomes irrevocable. An independent trustee will be appointed. Distributions to beneficiaries will proceed under the amended terms. He put the glasses back on and looked at me, not unkindly. Ms. Liora Hale, your father's intent is clear. The home and controlling interest transfer according to the subtrust. The court orders the return of diverted funds and enjoins further transfers without trustee approval. No one gasped. The room was not a theater. It was a place where words, chosen carefully, alter the fact of a day. Outside, a breeze lifted the edges of the court's flag and played with it like a cat with yarn. Vivian approached me on the concrete steps. Her eyes were red, but not from tears. From effort. He thought it was the right thing, she said of Carter. She didn't defend the choices, but she couldn't yet indict the chooser. I understood. I know, I said. Right is a map with many norths. Carter stepped closer, his face turned down a degree. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. But I am asking, if there's room, for a way back into something that looks like family. I watched a sparrow hop along the courthouse railing, the tiny machine of it precise, untroubled by our papers and signatures. A way back isn't a door, I said quietly. It's a road. You walk it. You don't announce it. I thought of the photograph in my bag, my father's words on the back, quiet road. Someday you'll know. The day had arrived, without fanfare. We shook hands with the independent trustee, a woman with a firm grip and a practical smile. Mr. Marsh tipped his umbrella to me, though there was still no rain. Your father would be pleased, he said. I didn't know if pleased was the right word. But I knew this, justice had been quiet, and it had been exact. The Dyer Street house meets me now like an old friend embarrassed about an argument you both barely remember. I enter with the new key the trustee issued, and the lemon oil scent is still there, but beneath it is something else, fresh bread from the bakery down the street, rain from a coat hung near a vent, my shampoo threading through the register's quiet warmth. The house is learning me again. I begin in the study, of course. I return my mother's letters to the shelf and retie them with new green cord, the silk whispering against cardboard as if relieved to be back in the dialogue. I place the photograph of the roadster on the desk in a frame that belonged to my grandmother, the gold leaf flaking at one corner, the glass imperfect as if it has known heat and cooled by degrees. The false bottom drawer closes now with the right click, no breath caught. The ledger is still missing. I make peace with that. Not every bone is recovered, and skeletons stand anyway. Vivian comes by with a basket of citrus and an apology that takes the shape of candied peels wrapped in parchment. We sit at the kitchen table, where the afternoon light pours in like milk, and talk about nothing consequential, window treatments, the stubbornness of the back door latch, the neighbor's dog who believes the fence is ceremonial. Grief needs these small rooms to rest in, otherwise it flattens all the big ones. When she leaves, we hug, carefully, like people carrying bowls full of something that might spill. At the factory, the new trustee meets with managers on an ordinary Tuesday. We walk the floor. Machines hum a single chord. The accountant explains revised controls in a tone that is more recipe than reprimand. I shake hands with employees who remember me as the girl who'd fall asleep in the break room with a book fallen across her chest. Welcome home, one of them says, and I feel it tangle my ribs. Home is not a building, it's an accuracy. Carter sends a letter, the paper crisp, the ink a blue darker than sadness. He doesn't ask for a meeting. He doesn't explain away. He includes a copy of a transfer back to the trust of funds he'd hoped to redeploy. He writes that he is taking a position out of state, not as punishment but as pilgrimage. I need to learn how to be useful, he says. Without being central. I sit with the letter a long time. Shame is a poor architect, responsibility builds better houses. On the first Saturday of spring I drive the blue roadster along the river road, the air still cool enough to make your cheeks feel alive. The engine's note is a stitched line of sound, steady as a seam. I pull over at the overlook where Dad used to point at cranes slowly shuttling across the shipyard. "See," he'd say, "how even giants move at human speeds." The water below is green-gray, moving the way time does, constant and new, old and original at once. I bring the diary with me. It smells like the vault and the hospice garden and, faintly, my father's cologne, a cedar note that has outlived the man and refuses to admit it. I read his entry from the day he started the subtrust. "Quiet road," he wrote again, this time adding a line, "We proceed not because we are certain, but because we must keep other people's certainties safe." What changed in me is not dramatic. No sudden hardness, no theatrical vow. I have not enrolled in a school for anger. Instead, my edges have become deliberate. I drink my tea while it's still hot. I answer emails with less apology. I pause in doorways to feel the weight of the wood in my palm. I keep the lamp off most nights and let the dark be the honest dark that rooms are born knowing. In the study I sit at the desk, the window cracked so that Jasmine sneaks in like a rumor. I take out a new notebook and write a letter I will not send. "Dad," I begin, "you built rails for us and I am learning to drive on them. The road is quiet, like you said. Quiet does not mean empty. Thank you for believing proof could be both a kindness and a boundary." I add a line from my mother, too, because love is multilingual. I tuck the letter into the diary's pocket. The diary will hold it the way a body holds a healed scar, not as an injury but as evidence of having mended. At dusk the house collects its colors into a deeper palette, the warm brown of the banister, the midnight of the fireplace brick, the bruised plum of the hallway runner. Lights click on across the street, small constellations looping the earth to a neighborhood. I set the table with bowls from the back cabinet and pour soup into them for two friends who arrive with bread and gossip and the sort of relief that knows your week didn't sink you. We eat slowly. Spoons tap ceramic. The clock in the entry murmurs the hour as if telling it to itself. After they leave, I stand in the doorway of the study and look at the frame on the desk. In the photograph, my father's grin is all teeth and scrunched up eyes, mine matches it. There is grease on our forearms and the roadster's hood gleams like a promise. On the back, in his old hand, "Quiet Road." I finally understand. The quiet road is not the way you avoid conflict. It is the route you take through it, with evidence, with patience, with the kind of strength that doesn't advertise itself. It is not a path made by one person. It is everything that steadied him, and now steadies me. A nurse who witnessed the steadiness of his decision, a lawyer who honored the belt and the border, a judge who listened until the numbers turned into meaning, a stepbrother who, may he walk long, chose the road back without needing to be watched. When I turn off the study lamp, the room holds its shape. My reflection fades from the window, replaced by the clean, unborrowed dark of my backyard, and the faint silhouette of the roadster under its cover. The air smells of jasmine and machine oil. Tomorrow the trustee will send a routine email, the accountant will balance a routine sheet, and the factory will hum its good, workmanlike chord. Tonight I slide the safe deposit key into the small blue dish by the door. It makes a bright, simple sound. I lock the house. The bolt throws a clean line. My life picks up the thread.